Good morning, everyone. In the last session, we discussed about what is circuit breaker and why we need to go for circuit breaker as part of our microservices. Circuit breaker is used to develop fault tolerant systems. Nothing but when our REST API or when our microservice is failed to execute the request, then we need to execute some fallback logic to process our request. When there is a problem in our application, we should not send the same problem to the client, right? So that is the reason we are going to implement this circuit breaker concept. So in order to implement circuit breaker concept, earlier we used to work with a library called in order to implement circuit breaker, earlier we will use a concept called Hystrix concept. But in Spring Boot 3.x version, this Hystrix concept got outdated. Excuse me. Earlier, to implement the circuit breaker, we used a concept called Hystrix concept. That Hystrix concept got outdated. Currently, we are going for Resilience 4J in order to implement circuit breaker in our application. So that is the reason yesterday when we create the project, we have added a dependency called Resilience 4J dependency. Okay, so fine. Along with this one, we are able to create one REST controller. Inside the REST controller, there are two methods available. User request will come to this first method. This first method is having a circuit breaker with the fallback method. What is the meaning of fallback method? Guys, what is the meaning of fallback method? What is the meaning of fallback method? When this main logic is failed to execute, then this fallback logic is going to execute. Now, how this circuit breaker should work? For that, we have configured properties in our YML file. So we enabled actuators, we configured application name, and we have given some circuit breaker configuration properties. Now, this circuit breaker will work based on these configuration properties only. Circuit breaker will have three states, guys. We will have three states in the circuit breaker. What are those things, guys? When you go for circuit breaker status. So we have mainly three statuses for the circuit breaker. First one is called closed state. Second one is open state. And the third one is off open state. What is the meaning that circuit breaker is in the closed state? Nothing but there is no fault in our application. We configured circuit breaker, but still the status of the circuit breaker is closed. Circuit breaker closed, nothing but our application does not have any fault. Our application is working as expected. Then when the circuit breaker will come from closed state to open state, when there is a fault in our application, we will configure monitor 10 requests. If 5 requests are failed continuously, then you come into open state. What will happen when the circuit breaker comes to the open state? What will happen when the circuit breaker comes to the open state? Only fallback logic will be executed. Main logic is already failing. It crossed the given limit also. I told to monitor 5 requests. 5 requests failed continuously. Then there is no use of calling that method again and again. So divert the traffic from the main method to fallback method. For that, we are going to use this open state. When the circuit breaker is in the open state, how much time that circuit breaker should be there in the open state, we are going to configure. So I will specify some seconds of time, 10 seconds or 30 seconds or 30 minutes. What do you want? How much time you want only fallback logic to execute? Then circuit breaker will be in the open state. From the open state, circuit breaker will go to off open. When the given time limit is completed, then circuit breaker will send the request to the main method. Then that is called as off open state. Once in the off open state, I will tell how many requests should we go for a trial in the off open? So if I say three requests should go to the main method in the off open. So if 3 requests are successful, then circuit breaker will be closed. If 3 requests are failed, then circuit breaker will again come to open state. So in order to execute this kind of fallback logic, in order to implement fault tolerant system, we are going to use this circuit breaker concept in our microservices architecture. Good. Next one, the most important part in the Spring Boot nowadays, that is Spring Security. So as of now, we are developing our microservices or REST APIs. We are executing our applications. We are developing our microservices. We are executing them independently. They are deployable and they are executable, accessible also. As of now, whatever the REST API we have developed, it is a public REST API. Anybody can access that REST API. There is no security for our REST APIs as of now. But in the real time, for every application, security is very, very, very important. Okay. When we are talking about Spring Security, first we should understand what is authentication and what is authorization. Okay. So when you are developing any application, client will not tell that for my project security is required. Security is a non-functional requirement. It's common in any project. When a client is giving some projects for the development, it is your responsibility as a developer to secure that application. We need to protect our application from the hackers. We need to secure each and every application. In real time, for every application, security will play very, very, very important role. In real time, for every application, security is very important. Okay. We need to secure our applications from hackers. We need to protect our application or our application data from the hackers. So in order to secure our applications, security is very important for each and every project. We are developing complete application by using Spring Framework, by using Spring Core, by using Spring Web MVC, Spring Data, Spring REST. We are using some modules in the Spring which are used to develop end-to-end application. So similarly, security is also part of our application development. Spring people provided a module that is called security module in order to secure our applications, right? It can be a normal web application or it can be a REST API. You can secure any type of web or distributed applications by using this Spring security concept. When we go for security, first we need to know what is authentication, then what is authorization. Authentication nothing but who can access our application. Basically, authentication means we are going to deal with a login functionality. So who can log in into our application? Who can access our application? That will be implemented as part of authentication. Authentication represents who can access our application. Especially it is called login functionality. Now, authorization, who can access which functionality? Like it is role-based access. Now, so if you go for a bank manager will have some functionalities access, but if you go for a normal bank clerk will not have access for all the functionalities. Okay. Administrator will have the access for all the functionalities in the project. Normal user will not have access for all the functionalities in the project. So like this, role-based access we are going to implement. Which user can access which functionality in our application? Which user can access which functionality in our application, that logic will be implemented by using authorization. So in the interview also, they will ask this question. What is the difference between authentication and authorization? How do you implement authentication and authorization in the Spring Boot application? Right. In order to implement authentication and authorization, we are using a concept called Spring Security concept. So in the security, mainly two things will be available. One is called authentication. Second one is called authorization. What is the meaning of authentication? It will decide. Authentication will check user credentials are valid or not. Can this user log in into our application or not? We are going to check by using authentication. What is the meaning of authorization? Authorization will decide who can access which functionality. Basically, it will decide role-based access for our application. We can implement both authentication and authorization for our application by using Spring Security, right? So using Spring Security, we can implement both authentication and authorization. Using Spring Security, we can implement both authentication and authorization. Are you guys able to follow this? Fine. Now, sir, what we need to learn as part of this Spring Security? The first one, which is HTTP basic authentication will be available. HTTP basic authentication will be available. Next one, in-memory user credentials authentication will be available. JDBC authentication will be available. Then OAuth will be available. OAuth 2.0. Then JWT security will be available. If you want to keep Spring Security in your resume, then you need to learn these 5 concepts, guys. Could you please read what are those 5 concepts? First one is HTTP basic authentication. Second one, in-memory user credentials authentication. Third one is JDBC authentication. Fourth one, OAuth 2.0. Fifth one, JWT. When we go for microservices security, JWT is very important. In the real time also, people are using JWT security to secure microservices based applications. Got it? So which security is most important here? JWT security is most important. JWT stands for JSON Web Tokens. JWT stands for JSON Web Tokens, which is used for our microservices. To secure our microservices, basically, we are going to use JWT. Now, using this Spring Security, we can implement both authentication as well as authorization. HTTP basic authentication, when you are starting with Spring Security, just to understand how Spring Security is working, for that we can go for basic authentication. If you want to configure your own credentials for the login functionality, then you can go for in-memory user credential. If you want to go with the database related configuration to check the login functionality, then we will go for JDBC authentication. OAuth 2.0 will be available. If you want to access one application from another, by using your Google account, we can access Ashok IT website. By using your GitHub account, you can access HackerRank website. By using one application account, if you can access another application, sir, what is the time? Wait outside. So we are discussing about OAuth, right? So if you want to access one application by using another application account, then we are going to use OAuth, right? If you want to implement token-based security, then we are going to use this JWT. JWT stands for JSON Web Tokens, right? Now, in order to implement security, there is a starter called Spring Boot Starter Security. Security Starter is available. Spring Boot people provided one security starter which is used to implement security for our application. How we have data JPA starter, actuator starter, mail starter, okay, web starter. Similarly, we are having a dependency called security starter. By using that security starter, we can implement security for our application. Good. Let us see. To implement a security, we can use Spring Boot starter security. That is the dependency that is provided by Spring Boot in order to secure our applications. Now, let me create one project. File, new, Spring Starter project, 51 application. I'm taking Spring Security, which is basic authentication. So as I told you, HTTP basic authentication will be available. Security, HTTP basic auth. HTTP basic authentication is available. It's a Maven project, packaging as a jar file, Java version 17, language is Java. Next, select web starter, select dev tools. This is common. Dev tools to restart our server, web starter to create our REST controllers. Then let us go for security. So here can you see there is a dependency called Spring Security dependency is available. Can you read this one? Highly customizable authentication and access control framework for Spring application. So this is highly customizable authentication and authorization framework. Access control nothing but authorization. Who can access which functionality we are going to decide by using this Spring Security. That's it. I'm just adding security dependency. I'm not doing anything else. Click on next, click on finish. Okay. So the project is getting created. Go to its pom.xml. First time we added security dependency in our project. Go to its pom.xml. Can you see the dependency now? Boot starter security dependency is added and web starter is added and dev tools added. Okay. Spring Boot starter security dependency is available. Now let me go and create one REST controller in this project. New class .rest. I'm taking this as message REST controller. Message REST controller. So let us represent this class as a REST controller by using @REST controller annotation. Okay. Now let's write one method, public string get message. Okay. Return welcome to Spring Security. Welcome to Spring Security. Let us map it to a GET request by using @get mapping. Using get mapping /message. In this project, currently, did I configure anything related to security, guys? Any code related to security? There is no code related to security. Just we have added one dependency called starter security dependency. Now refresh this one. Let us run this project, run as boot application. I created a very simple REST API which contains a REST controller, and in that REST controller there is a method available. Okay, and I added security starter server.port, the port number 8081. Okay, now refresh this project, right click, run as boot application. I'm running this Spring Boot application. Fine, go to browser. Now localhost colon 8081/message. So that is my REST controller URL pattern. Observe carefully. Localhost colon 8081/message. Enter. Am I able to access my REST API now? Did I develop any UI page in that project? No. This is called auto configuration. When we add security starter in our application, by default, HTTP basic authentication will be implemented. Okay. Now, when you access localhost colon 8081/message, we are getting one login page. How come this UI page is coming to our application? It is not developed by us. There is no UI page in our application. There is no login functionality in my code. I created a simple REST controller with one get request method. When I send a request to that method, by default, this login page is coming. Okay. Now, who is providing this login functionality for our application? You need to authenticate yourself, then only you can access our method. So my application is secured with authentication. My application is secured with authentication. What kind of authentication is available now? It is a HTTP basic authentication is available. Now, here, if you enter some data and click on sign in, what it is saying? That means it is checking whether our credentials are valid, or where is that logic? Where is that code to display this login page? Validate the credentials are valid or not. Display that error message if the credentials are invalid. Who implemented this? Security starter. When you add that security starter, by default, this HTTP basic authentication will be available for our application. Then how to log in? What are the credentials we need to use to log in into our application? The default username will be user and password will be printed on the console. You see here, when we start the application by using security starter, then it is saying that using generated security password. And what they are saying here, generated password is only for development. Your security configuration must be updated before running your application in the production. Boss, whatever the security is available, it is very basic. That is for just a development purpose. You need to modify your configuration for security when you are going to deploy the project for production. What is the meaning of a production? Live environment. Good. Let us copy this password. Let us copy this password and go here, give the password. Click on sign in. Now I'm able to log in successfully. Then my method is executed as expected. So that means my application is secured with Spring security. That is very basic security. HTTP basic authentication is available. Are you guys clear? Now, second time when I access, is it asking for login once again, or login it will ask only for one time? Only one time or multiple times? How many times you will log in into your project? Only one time. Once you log in, you can access all the functionalities which are available in that application. Similarly, here also, when you access this URL in the same browser for multiple times, login is not asking. But if I go for another browser, if I try to access the same method once again, observe what is the behavior. Now, I'm accessing the same URL in another browser. When I access in the another browser, what is happening? That means once you log in into this application, it will maintain a cookie in the browser. If a cookie is available, it will allow you to access. If the cookie is not available, it will ask you to log in. Are you clear? But is it recommended to use these default credentials to secure our application, guys? Is it recommended to use these default credentials to secure our application? No, it is not recommended to use these default credentials to secure our application. Here, you can customize the credentials also. Currently, when we have security starter in the project, default username is coming as user, password is printing on the console. That is a random password. I don't want that random password. I want to fix username and password to access our application. To fix that username and password, Here we are going for spring.security.username. Okay, so user.name I'm giving as Ashok IT, spring.security.user.password. So I'm giving something like this, abc@123. If you, this is overriding default credentials. If you don't write these properties, then it will take username as a user, password will be printed on the console. I don't want like that. I don't want like that. Here, I want to configure username and I want to configure my password. Okay, now let's refresh this project. Do the Maven update. Maven, update the project. Run as boot application. Application started. This time, password is printed on the console. Password is not printed on the console. Not printed. Earlier, password printed. Now, not printed. Why? We are overriding security credentials. By writing in the properties file, we are overriding our security credentials. Okay. Now let's go to browser again. Message. It is asking username and password. So if I give some dummy data, bad credentials, I need to give my username and password. If I give the correct credentials, then only I'm able to access my application. Okay. As it is a get request method, we are able to access from the browser. Now, same method, I want to access from the Postman, guys. So generally, how do we test our REST APIs? By using Postman. Now, in the browser, when I access that one, I'm getting a login page in the browser. So I'm able to log in with my username and password. I'm able to access my application. Now, same API I want to access by using Postman. Same API I want to access by using Postman. Click on send. What happened now? Login page is coming or error is coming? Error is coming. What is the status code? Unauthorized. Boss, this application is secured. You can't access this application. This application is secured. You can't access. See the difference. When I access this URL from the browser, login page is loaded to login with my credentials. Same URL when I access from the Postman, I'm not getting the login page. I'm getting error status code 401. How our application understood the request is coming from the browser or the request is coming from the Postman? How? When we are discussing about API gateway, I explained. When you access the application from the browser, when you access the application from the Postman, headers will be different. Okay. If you send a request from the Postman, in the header, one Postman token will go. Based on that Postman token, it is going to understand that. Based on the Postman token, it is going to understand this request is coming from the Postman. Then send the response with the 401 unauthorized. Send the response with the 401 unauthorized. When I send the same request from the browser, now I am getting login page as a response. I'm getting login page as a response. Are you guys clear? Now, how to access that application from the Postman? How to access that application from the Postman? How we are accessing from the browser? How we are accessing our application from the browser? Come on. We are accessing that application from the browser with a login page. But in the Postman, that login page is coming or that login page is not coming. Login page is coming or login page is not coming. Login page is not coming. Here, as we discussed, when we add security starter, by default, this basic authentication will be executed. So we need to send authentication credentials in the request. If it is a browser, observe carefully. My application is having security starter. With the security starter, by default, we are getting basic authentication. For the basic authentication, username will be user, password will be auto-generated, will be printed on the console. If you don't want the default credentials for your application security, you can override those credentials. The credentials, if you want to override, configure them in the properties file. Now, when I run my application, it will use this username and password for authentication. Now, when user access application from the browser, it will display login page for authentication. You enter your username, you enter your password, and you log in into your application. Okay. Suppose if you want to access same application from the postman, then you need to send authentication credentials, guys. When you want to access same URL from the browser, then you need to send your authentication credentials in the request. So if you see here, headers concept is available, body concept is there. What is the second one? Auth concept is available. So if you want to send any authentication information in the request, if you want to send any authentication information in the request, then you need to go for this authentication tab. In this authentication tab, they are asking what type of authentication you want. Is it JWT token? Is it OAuth authentication? Is it a basic authentication? What kind of authentication is available for our application now? It is a HTTP basic authentication is available. Now, observe. If you want to access secured REST API from the postman, you go to this authentication tab and you select basic auth. When you select the basic auth, it is asking the username and password. Asking the username and password. Now, so let us take our username, which is Ashok IT, and password abc@123. I'm giving my username and password in the authentication token. When I give my username and password in the authentication, if you see here, what happened now? One header is added. What is the header is going in the request? How many headers available now? 9 headers. If I remove this authentication, no auth, then header, how many headers available now? So what is the meaning of that? What is the meaning of that? Authentication credentials are going in the header. Okay. So when you are sending a request for secured REST API, we need to send some data in the header. We need to send some data in the body. What data we are sending in the header? Token data, authentication data. What data will go in the body? Payload will go in the body. Okay. Now, how this authentication header will go to the browser server? Here, header key will be available as authorization space, value is basic, then encode username colon password. This is the format. So when you give authentication username and password in the postman, that postman will prepare a header like this. Header nothing but it will have a key and value. What is the key will be? What will be the key here? Key will be authorization. What will be the value? Basic. That means it is a basic authentication value. Basic space. Our username colon password will be encoded by using base 64. So this data will go to our REST API. This data will go to our REST API. So based on this data, our REST API security will understand these credentials are valid or not. If the credentials are valid, how it will understand credentials are valid or not? In the application already I configured the credential. So whatever the credentials I'm sending from the postman, whatever the credentials I'm going to send from the postman, it is going to match. These credentials are matching with the credentials we configured in the properties file. That is called validation, verification. So these credentials, whatever the credentials are coming in the request, these credentials are matching with the credentials available in our application or not. If these credentials are matching, then only request will be processed. Otherwise, request will not be processed. But you need to understand how postman is sending the credentials to the server. Postman is sending the credentials to the server by using HTTP header concept. Header nothing but key value will be available. What is the key? Key is authorization. What is the value? Encoded username and password with the help of basic. Now you see here. Go to postman. Now I'm not assume that I'm giving some wrong data. I'm giving wrong data. Then what happened? 401 unauthorized request is coming. Okay. So let me give valid data. When I'm giving valid data, can you see how the header is prepared? What is the key now? What is the value? Basic space. This is encoded username colon password. Our username and password will be encoded and it will be sent in the header. Okay. Now click on send. When I send the request with this username and password, am I able to get the response now? So what is the meaning of that? What is the meaning of that? Come on. Our application is authenticated successfully. Okay. Our request is authenticated successfully in the application. Application is secured by using basic authentication. We are sending one HTTP GET request along with the header. What is the header key? What is the header key? Authorization. What is the value? Basic space key comma value. Basic space key comma value. That key value basic space encoded username and password is going to the server. It authenticated that credentials are valid. Request is processed. Response is sent successfully. Are you guys clear with this one? Good. So tell me, what is basic authentication? What is the HTTP basic authentication? What is the HTTP basic authentication? Come on, guys. It is one technique. It is one technique which is used to secure our application. It is one technique which is used to secure our application. Okay. What will be the credentials for the basic authentication? What are the credentials for the basic authentication? Username will be user, password will be auto-generated. If I don't want to go with that username and password, override. How do we override? By using properties. By using properties. Spring.security.user.name, security.password. When you access this application from the browser, what is happening? Login page is coming for the authentication. When you want to access this application from the postman, then what is happening? Login page will come in the postman, or login page will not come in the postman. Login page will not come in the postman. Then what we need to do? If the login page is not coming in the postman, then what we need to do? We need to send the credentials in the header. What is the header key? Authorization. Header value, encoded username and password. Okay. Are you guys clear with this one? Now the task is, we are developing one REST API with a basic authentication, guys. we developed one REST API which is having basic authentication. Like you can override the credentials. You configure the credentials in the properties file. Don't go with the default random password, which will be changing every time when the project is restarted. So what is the problem with the default password? What is the problem with the default password that we have? Which is changing every time. Which is changing every time. So I want to fix some username and password. So that's why I'm going for my that's why I'm going for my properties file. Today my throat is not supporting. All right. All right. Now guys, we are developing one REST API which is having basic authentication. You override the credentials by using properties file. Now, I want you to develop one REST client application. As of now, we accessed this API by using browser, by using Postman. Okay. So tomorrow, you in the company, you need to develop one REST client application which is going to access a REST API which is secured by using basic authentication. You send the request and you get the response. So today, basically you need to practice how to access secured REST API. So in our course, we developed REST client, we developed consumer. In how many ways we developed our consumer? In how many ways we developed our consumer? In 2 ways. What are those 2 ways? By using REST template, by using web client. Now I want you to develop REST client by using REST template concept, by using web client. Can you access this REST API directly with the URL? No. Why we can't access this application directly with the URL? It is secured by using basic authentication. So how we need to access secured REST API? By using REST template and by using web client. That you need to understand and you need to practice that today. So you understand the assignment? What is the assignment? Develop a REST API with HTTP basic authentication by overriding the default credentials. Then develop REST client application which is going to access secured REST API. One method, one application with REST template concept. Another one client with REST template, another client with the web client concept. Is my requirement clear? So can you tell me how to do this implementation? Earlier we directly accessed get for entity method. When I use get for entity method, what is the meaning? Directly get request will go to the URL. Now, can I send a direct get request to the URL? I need to send the header also. Without sending the header, can we access that? No. How do what we need to send in the header? Key and value. What is the key? Authorization. What is the value? Basic space. Encoded username colon password we have to send. Okay. So this is my assignment for today. First thing, develop Spring Boot REST API with a Spring Security. With the Spring Security, that also HTTP basic authentication. Already I have done this in the class and I have shown you how to test also. Develop one Spring Boot REST API with the Spring Security. See how luxury is there. This is what will happen in the online classes. Rajkumar, sleep man. You sleep properly. Take one pillow and you sleep. Develop Spring Boot REST API. That is the reason I am asking you to come for the offline classes. After 5 minutes, you will sleep. Develop Spring Boot REST API with Spring Security. So basically, you need to use a concept called HTTP Basic Authentication. Then second one, develop consumer application. I mean to say REST client to access secured REST API using REST template and web client. One example you can do by using REST template. Another example you can do by using web client. Are you guys clear with the assignment? Develop Spring Boot REST API with Spring Security, HTTP Basic Authentication, override default credentials. If you go with the default credentials, every time the password is going to change. So that's why override the default credentials by using properties file. Then develop our consumer application, which is a REST client, to access secured REST API using REST template and web client. Are you guys clear? Good. So once we are able to implement this one, then next we can go for in-memory authentication, JDBC authentication, OAuth, and JWT concept. Good. So what is the Spring Security, guys? You got the clarity? What is Spring Security now? What is Spring Security now? Spring Security is one module. Spring Security is one module in the Spring framework which is used to secure our web and distributed applications. Can I use the Spring Security for standalone application? No. This security is applicable for the web application and distributed application. So Spring Security is one module in the Spring framework which is used to secure our application from the hackers. So when you go for security, two things we need to keep in our mind. One is called authentication. Another one is called authorization. Authentication represents login functionality, which a user can access our application, who can log in into our application. Login check will be called as login functionality is called authentication. Role-based access is called authorization. Once a login, who can access which functionality will be decided by authorization. By using this Spring Security, we can implement both authentication as well as authorization in our application. Okay, so here when we are going for Spring Security implementation, these things will be available. HTTP basic authentication, in-memory credentials authentication, JDBC authentication, OAuth, and JWT will be available. In the industry, which one is more famous? JWT is more famous for the microservices security, right? In order to implement security for our application, Boot provided one starter that is called Spring Boot Starter Security dependency is available. When we add this dependency, by default, HTTP basic authentication will be implemented for our application. When we add security starter, then by default HTTP basic auth will be added for our application. Okay. When we add security starter, then by default HTTP basic authentication will be added for our application. When we access basic auth application, from browser, login page will come for authentication. Okay. When we access basic auth app from postman, then we need to send HTTP header with credentials like below. Okay, so the header will be available like this. Example: authorization space basic encode username colon password. If you are accessing secured REST API from the postman, how the header is going with the key and value, same thing you need to do when you are accessing secured REST API from another application also. Now here my REST API is available, which is secured by using basic authentication. Now I want to access that secured REST API from another Java application. So directly you can't access because it is a secured. So if you want to access, you need to send your credentials in the HTTP header. So the concept is how to send authentication header, authentication credentials in the header by using REST template, how to send the credentials by using web client. That is the concept. So that is what you need to practice today. So tomorrow we are going to discuss about in-memory credentials and JDBC credentials by using Spring Security. Is this clear? Good. Any questions, anyone? And guys, an announcement. So today, from today onwards, at 9:30 a.m., new Spring Boot microservice batch is going to start, classroom and online training. If you have any friends, you can inform them. So today, now in another 1 hour, our Spring Boot microservices new batch is going to start at 9:30 a.m. And today evening, my DevOps with AWS batch will be starting at 8 p.m. IST. Spring Boot microservice is both classroom and online training. DevOps with AWS is only online training batch is available. So you can share the information with your friends if anyone is interested to learn. I'm sharing that poster in our group. You can keep it as your WhatsApp status so that it will reach more people. Let me send that poster. Yeah. Spring Boot microservices. Today demo is available. Yes. I sent in the chat box. Could you please update that as your WhatsApp status? All online and offline students, please share that poster. Demo is going to start in another 1 hour. JRTP students also. Spring Boot microservices new batch from today at 9:30 a.m. Please share it as status in your WhatsApp. Did you get the poster? Yeah. Online students. Any questions,
Sir,
anybody? You can ask me.
in Redis case that day asked, right? Some updated in the Redis case DB how other
Online
microservices
students.
called, right?
Any questions, anyone?
Sir,
Yeah, I have a small
in Redis
query.
case that day I asked like if any updated in the data in Redis case other microservices who called Redis case how they got notified.
So we need to configure a trigger for that, sir. You mean to say when the data is updated in the Redis, how the microservices will
Yes,
be notified? So microservices
yes,
will
yes.
not be notified because microservices, whenever they want, they are fetching from the Redis cache, right? There is no notification mechanism directly.
So scheduler we need to
If you
implement
want
or
to,
any
you
other?
can do that scheduler. That is at our Java level only.
Then trigger how we can do triggering in
You
the
no need to notify that now. Whenever they want the data, they will access from the Redis. Why you need to notify that?
okay,
Suppose
okay.
there
Because
are
there is changes in the DB, then somebody
it's not DB,
call the
it's
data.
cache. DB is different, cache is
Yeah,
different,
sorry,
right?
cache,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if there
So
are some
is there?
say, listen to me. If there are some changes in the cache, whenever you access the data, you will get the updated data only, right?
Okay, okay,
You no need to notify them.
okay, sir. Okay.
Sir, what is cookie, sir?
Sir, cookie is a small information which will be stored in the browser.
Okay, sir.
And also in today's class, you were telling that we will be putting the data in the Redis cache.
Correct.
Doesn't it get from the database? It doesn't retrieve it and store it in the Redis cache?
That should be, I mean, manually you can import the database data into Redis, or through one application you can push the data in Redis. Directly from the DB, data will not come to the Redis, right? Some administration operation should be there. How the data directly will go from DB to Redis? Either you need to insert through program, or you need to insert through some scripts.
Okay, but the thing that was covered in the class, we are pushing the data directly into the Redis cache, right?
Right,
It wouldn't.
right. You
What
can,
if we miss that data?
let me tell you. In the Redis cache, you can push the data manually by uploading the sheets. Okay, that is one approach. Second approach, programmatically you can push the data into Redis cache. So in our class, we have seen how to push the data to Redis cache by using Java application, and how to pull the data from the Redis by using Java application. That is what we learned. Okay, manual pushing the data, that part will be taken care by administrators, not the developers.
Okay. And also this is from the Spring part. I often get confused between when to use @configuration and @component. Can you please differentiate?
Configuration means when your class contains some bean methods, you are customizing the bean creation, that class will be used with configuration. @component, your class is direct a Spring Bean which contains some business logic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, like
Ashok, sir.
here we are using like the credentials which are predefined, right? Like you're declaring them in the configuration file.
Correct.
But in real time, like each user will be having one
Sir, that is what I
credential.
told you. There is a JDBC authentication. Security is
Okay,
not
okay.
completed. Today is just introduction. JDBC authentication means it will check the credentials with the database.
Okay, okay.
You got my point?
Oh, yes, sir. I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, here we can add multiple users for basic
Sir, when we are
authentication.
going for basic authentication, it will be with only one user, sir. If you want to add multiple users by using in-memory authentication or JDBC authentication, we can do it, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, I have a question based on web client, sir.
Sorry? Can you
Hello?
come again? Yeah.
Ashok, sir, I have question based on web client, right? Last time we taught you taught us about web client. If we are doing configuration for a web client, right? So there we are setting their proxy in this configuration.
Correct.
We can set their proxy. So suppose I want to enable or disable that proxy. So on which base condition we can enable and disable that proxy?
Generally, proxy nothing but in the real time whitelisting concept will be available. From which IPs we need to allow the network, from which IPs we should not allow the network. That proxy servers will be maintained by networking team, not by our developers. Okay, that is called IP whitelisting concept. Networking team will do that.
Okay, but in our project, we do have like this web client configuration, and we have set their proxy for the same. Suppose
proxy server, which server that networking team is,
server.
that server you are giving, you will set that the configurations that are required, which IP request they should allow, they should not allow, that will be configured in that proxy server by networking team.
Okay.
Not by the developer. Even I have never done that configuration.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, guys. Good. Thank you. With this, I'm stopping for today and we'll meet in the tomorrow session. Please practice that assignment.